I'm Catherine Kingsley.
And I'm Catherine Stern.
And this is
Contemplating Culture,
a missionary walk through a secular age. Together we journey through A Secular Age by Charles Taylor, a book looking at the history and philosophy of how the world got where it is, and the impacts of our contemporary culture for us today as missionaries.
And we're inviting you to join the conversation.
Hello and welcome to Contemplating Culture.
Hello, everyone.
Well, welcome to today's episode. So today we're looking at chapter 14 of the book A Secular Age by Charles Taylor, and the chapter is called Religion Today. So that's what we're kicking off with today, is the first section of that chapter.
Isn't that cool? Chapter 14 out of 17 chapters. We're like not close to finish. There's like 200 pages or more to go of this book, but it feels like we're getting somewhere.
There's definitely progress, and we're right in the last 100 years now, so things are feeling a bit familiar. It's good. And we have been looking at, if you've been following along, the age of mobilization, so where people were moving, I guess, from rural areas into urban areas, and with that the people were kind of disconnected from their communities. They're looking for new communities, new ways to connect with faith, and they're easily mobilized into action. And there's a whole bunch of factors around what then shifts to what Charles Taylor would call the age of authenticity. So that's then what we looked at next. There's a lot of factors that make up that age of authenticity. And what we're looking at now, I guess, is how does all of this movement through ages affect what religion looks like? So that's why we're looking at specifically religion and how that has shifted. So he starts us off today by looking at the case of America post World War II. So you've got these people that have been through world wars, they've been through the Depression, and now it's just green pastures. They've got all avenues open to them. Everything's looking great, and everything's kind of held in a nice little way. And this is, of course, like a grand sweeping caricature of probably how things actually were. So you've got this nice little triangle where you've got family, state, and church all kind of holding each other together. So you've got the family, kind of think American dream. You've got people out in the suburbs and they've got their nice little family, their nice little parish community life. So the family is producing good citizens for the state and good believers for the church. And then you've got the church. So the church provides values for the family to live by and for the state to be governed by. And then you've got the state. So the state is realizing the values that the church is putting out and provides something that upholds those values that the family then holds. So you've got all of these things nicely in place. But then these factors in the world start to come about that weren't really expected, and they start to slowly dismantle this nice little pyramid, which we've got things like the racial struggles, the Vietnam War, the rise of feminism, the sexual revolution. So all these things happening around the 1950s, 60s in America that start to kick us not just into the age of authenticity, but kind of out of the age of religion and into what Charles Taylor would say is now spirituality is being separated from religion. So that's one of the outcomes of this period of 10 or 20 years, I guess.
There's something about like the way he draws that picture too, that's like the bubble bursts. It's not all as happy and harmonious as it looks. Things are exposed as broken and like things being wrong with it and need replacing. And because things that are wrong and need replacing, people assume that there's a sort of we need to throw the whole picture out, or that faith needs to go, or that form of faith needs to go along with that image of what society looks like, or that image of what the family looks like.
And that's it. It's in all three of those is broken down. The image of what the family should look like starts to shatter. The image of, trust in church and institution starts to shatter. The trust in, particularly, I guess, with the Vietnam War, the, trust in the state starts to fracture. So with all of these things fractured, what people are left with, and what Charles Taylor says, is that people start to, they've still got that hunger for the spiritual, but they start to seek it directly themselves because they can't trust the external things, or they don't trust them, whichever one it is.
Oh, it's quite fascinating there, because the media line or the academic line at this point is that people are throwing faith out altogether. That, America, the West, that, people are just letting go of faith and religion. And this is where the image of the idea of secular has crept into our hearts and minds, of people abandoning faith for atheism, kind of, growing out of faith. But Charles Taylor's whole book, his whole theory is, no, there's something different happening here. And this is where he's bringing in this argument of actually they're turning from what we might call recognized religion, traditional religion, perhaps, to more something of a search for spirituality, that need to connect with the spiritual, to the transcendent, is still part of the human person, but it's finding different outlets to what it might once have used.
And some of the conditions for this search is that there can't be anything that limits it or preempts it. So you can't say that religion, organized religion, has to be the outcome of your search. You can't say that organized religion has to be the start of your search, that there's, like the individual has to be free. And some of the ways they might be exploring this is, seeking a unity and a wholeness of self, trying to reclaim with that. He says we're kind of like the heirs, the ones, descendants of the Romantic era, are still trying to reclaim the place of feeling against reason, reclaiming the body. And also in this time, we've got like this link where spiritual wholeness is linked with health, that this link is, so all of these things, the seeker in this age is trying to unite all of these things. And I think next time we'll talk more about specifically what some of these factors might look like in the space of spirituality. But one of the things that he says emerges in this time is two extremes. So if we take on one end the people that are in the fixed position of organized religion, and they're looking at all these offshoots coming down in under the title of spirituality, and there's this, judgment, I guess, that they're only there for themselves. They don't care about other people or society or the transcendent. It's all about me and what's guiding me, what's going to be good for me, all about the self-indulgent. And then the people that are moving away from organized religion, having a caricature in the other direction of, religion is just about rules and laws and external things imposed upon me. And this section is actually really important for Charles Taylor's whole work that he's given us, because his whole point is sometimes people are operating out of these caricatures and they're repulsed by this caricature so much that they think they almost get comforted in their own position, thinking because the only alternative is, this horrific other thing. But actually, his whole point is most people live in the middle and would have a reaction to either one.
Absolutely, as I do. I find I actually really struggle when he's getting into this stuff, because the caricatures, I'm like, I vehemently object to the idea of faith, religion being all about rules and authoritarian, even if that's what it looks like, and it maybe is a true caricature that the world outside looks at us as. And as somebody who is trying to evangelize the seekers of the world, a deeper understanding of what they're looking for than just they're just out to indulge themselves or make themselves feel better. Like, there's a frustration in me when people start dealing in caricatures, to a point where I twitch even when people start talking about the church, about rules. We had a homily this morning, daily mass. It was really simple homily, but I was already reacting in the first sentence because the priest got up. There's a whole bunch of primary school kids there, and he was like, our faith is all about rules. And everything in me reacted. I'm like, no, it's not. How dare you get these kids thinking that faith is all about rules? And he went on to redeem himself somewhat by talking about, well, all the rules point to love. It's either about love of God or love of neighbor. And if you can't remember one of the rules, then come back to love. I'm like, well, that's good, but you've still embedded in these children's minds and in anybody else in this room who wasn't already solid in a bigger vision of faith that our faith is all about rules. And I find that really frustrating because our faith isn't all about rules. Our faith is all about Jesus. It's about relationship with God. And to the extent that there's rules, I really had to think about this because Charles Taylor, it's like, I just keep reacting. What is it I'm reacting to here? Because he's right. At one end, there is a whole lot of stuff about rules and authority. So I had to stop and think, well, what are the rules and authority all about? And I guess I came to the answer that we're trying to protect orthodoxy.
Yeah, what is orthodoxy? How would you define that, Kat?
Well, if you're going to just take the term, it means right worship, right glory. But it's not, I would say it's not primarily about doing things the right way. When I think about what's important about orthodoxy, I actually think what's important is fullness. That I want people to have the fullness of what our faith offers. And I remember once when I was teaching catechism, I don't know whether you were in the novitiate at that point, but I was teaching all the about all the early church heresies. And I had to sit down and like write this lecture. And I suddenly thought, oh, you know what? The best way to help myself and other people understand why these heresies are even important to study or understand is to stop and go, like, what does this heresy take away from our faith? What does it take away from the possibility of our experience of God? Like, if Jesus wasn't fully God, how does that impact on not just what I believe, but on my life, my future, my salvation? And I think that's the fullness of what the authority of the church, the rules around what we believe and how we practice it, is trying to protect or give people a full experience of what God is offering us.
And that's really interesting because, I mean, as we've probably talked about before, one of the pursuits of the age of authenticity and the modern moral order that goes with it is this pursuit of fullness. I don't think people would take too lightly to being told that it lands in Orthodox Christianity, but it is, and I think as missionaries, that's definitely something that we can consider. Is it's not just a nice thing that we're offering, it's actually the fullness. And I think we need to, exactly as you went through in that process of really understanding and believing and having confidence in the fact that, like, no, what I'm offering is the fullness. This is what I've been offered, and it's what I want to offer to others. And the reason that I don't want to give you a watered down version is because I want you to have the fullness.
So at the other end of the spectrum, the personal search end, the bit that the age of authenticity brings in, that even the idea of authenticity in faith, there's something really important and balancing on the other end of that. Because I might have all the fullness in terms of in my head, this is the right stuff. But Christianity's a faith of the heart. It's about a relationship with God, and God cares about being in a personal relationship with me as an individual. That's something I've got to discover through encounter, through direct experience. I would say that if you want to live a full and balanced Christian life, you need the both.
And you make a good point. You said, I would say the fullness of life. I think one of the things that becomes very fascinating in the age of authenticity is that we've got this rapid pluralism that comes about where you can take a word and shift its meaning and it's got 1,000 meanings now. And so I think this is one of the reasons why discussion and dialogue becomes so tricky, because you can be using the same word but having very different meanings. So you take this word fullness or even spirituality. So I was trying to explain to my brother he grew up in a Catholic family, but he's very of the world now. And I don't know what his formation around anything to do with church has been, since he left Catholic school. I was explaining, the different buildings that we have on the block of land that I'm living on. So I was talking about the different buildings on the block of land where I live, because he asked who owns where you live. And I was like, well, that's a bit complicated. And I started right down at the bottom of the block is the school. And I said, well, the school is on land owned by the Carmelite friars, but it's in the Maris tradition. So I was like, it's got these two spiritualities. And he was just totally lost. He's like, what do you mean? And I think he thought I was saying that they were two different religions. But I was kind of trying to say that, oh no, they're Catholic. Like they believe the same things, they just have a different spirituality of how that's expressed. And he just looked at me, like blank for 5 seconds. He's like, I think spirituality means a very different thing to me. And it made me think, like, having a word that, and it's true, I would probably use spirituality in a very different way in a different context. But in my head, it was like, that's how you explain the difference between, it's the same religion, but it's a different expression, a different spirituality kind of thing of how that's expressed. And and that wasn't even, like a discussion. That was me just trying to explain who owns the land. Like you can see that the different ways that we've been formed in how we understand words makes conversation very tricky in this middle ground.
Also, like I think it emphasizes something of even just that you can use the terminology of two different spiritualities within one faith, and the two very orthodox spiritualities, Mara spirituality, Carmelite spirituality, illustrates something of that the spectrum that Charles Taylor wants to draw a picture of in the world between, atheism at one end and orthodox faith at the other end, perhaps, is also to some extent existent within the church, that there's a very broad spectrum there. I would say would be people on a personal search in the church, where am I going to land, which spirituality fits me best, that there's actually existent within the church the capacity for people to go on this spiritual quest and be entirely Orthodox Christians the entire time.
Absolutely. And this is one of the examples that Charles Taylor gives us is that the values of the age of authenticity do not have to be opposed to the values of Orthodox religion, even though in our mind the world might set them up as opposing and opposite. He says actually those same values of authenticity, of wanting to pay attention to the self and look after the self and be guided by, what's within, doesn't have to be opposed to landing in religion. And he gives us the example of what he calls devout humanists. We can have a discussion about what that means and what we might want to add to that. But his examples he uses are St. Francis de Sales, who is very much a spirituality of the love of God and encountering that within yourself, and Ignatius of Loyola, who offers us the spiritual exercises of looking at what's happening within, the movements within, and looking at movements of consolation and desolation, largely based on our feelings and thoughts and things that are happening within.
Yeah, I think that Ignatius and Francis, who, by the way, are both patrons of our congregation, Missionaries of God's Love, they both embody that good kind of balance between wanting to give the fullness of the Catholic faith and wanting to draw people into that personal encounter and engage with people's personal search for relationship with God. They do it in different ways. Ignatius has a very structured lot of exercises, ways of entering into prayer in order to help people encounter the person of Jesus, encounter the mercy of God, really dive into what Jesus' death and resurrection means and what it means to then live my whole life as a Christian. Francis is less structured in that way, but wanting to help, and particularly with a focus on lay people, which was unusual for his time, wanting to help the individual encounter the love of God in their life and live in a space where they're expressing with the fullness of who they are individually made to be by God.
So when did they live, Kat?
So Ignatius was right at the beginning of the Counter Reformation. He's the end of the 15th century, beginning of the 16th century. I think he died in 1515. Francis de Sales is about 100 years later. He's born in the mid to late 16th century and he dies in the early 17th century. So both of them are really central to the Counter Reformation, the Catholic Church's response in the Council of Trent to the Reformation. So I think they both predate the age of mobilization. They're more sitting in an earlier stage.
Like it's really interesting. You can see how they were quite revolutionary because they're still speaking, and I think they have something to offer. Seekers in the secular age that are struggling with very formed in the values of authenticity, of wanting that personal search, wanting it to be authentically coming from me and what's within me. And so I think the first thing they offer is that there's theological justification, and they give us a framework for engaging with the inner self and its desires and movements, that they were operating in a time that was the Jansenists were on the rise or in their prime, and the Jansenist heresy was very much that you couldn't trust the self. There was, human nature is broken and you can't trust anything of themselves. So then they're coming along saying, well, actually, there is a way that you can trust, what's happening in the self. And that attitude is possibly still about this sense that, am I good? Can I trust something that's in me? It's kind of sitting there as a question, and they're saying, well, God is within you and God's love is within you, and he communicates to you within yourself, within your feelings and your thoughts. Like your interior life is a place where you can trust, but also giving tools, as you were saying. Ignatius gives us a concrete tool that it's not founded in the externals though. It's not a code necessarily, but it is something concrete that people can turn to. And Francis would say the interior love of God, that is also an interior experience that you can trust. But there's that word balance you use. There is a balance that they both try and embrace of, I can trust what's within, but I'm also aware that I'm capable of self-deceit. And that's what, through the sacramental life of the church and through orthodoxy of belief that they hold within the Catholic Church, that there's this awareness that I'm not the whole picture. I can trust to a certain degree.
And that there's a sense of safety, which I think I've mentioned before. I would also name this age of authenticity as an age of anxiety. And I would say that there's a sense in people, young people in particular, who I see coming into the church, of feeling safe in a place of where the teachings of the church hold me, if you like, and hold my personal search within safe boundaries.
Yeah, you reminded me just then, the way you said that, of my little niece Lucy when she was about 2, and I took her out into the ocean and she came back and she was telling her mama later, she's like, Mama, I love Auntie KK because she knows how to hold me. That sense of, like in the waves of life, having something or someone that can hold you amidst all the ups and downs of life, that that you've got that safety. And I think that that's exactly it. There's space to explore, there's space for the seeker, but there's also a safety that can hold them. Now let's get back to this term. So Charles Taylor calls them the devout humanists, but I think there's lots of ways you could be a devout humanist that didn't necessarily land you in being a practicing Catholic and a saint of the Catholic Church. And I think one of the temptations that I think we've seen over the last 50 years in the Catholic Church, and probably wider Christianity as well, is trying too much to move into the humanism side of being so affirming of the human person and the individual at loss of that devotional part, or what we would say is, God, or even as you were saying, Kat, can't remember a single mention of Jesus so far in the chapter. That at the heart of the devotion is not just a generic spirituality, a generic devotion to the transcendent, but actually there's a concreteness about it that we're definitely on about, and that I think we want to be aware of, that we don't water down the saints and what they offer, but actually what they offer is not just, a generic love or anything, but a person. They offer us Jesus, and he's the one that we're made for, that we transformed in and through and by, and that's the goal of our work as missionaries of God's love, is to bring people to Jesus.
And I think that's where, like, I find myself reacting all through the book to Charles Taylor. And to be fair to him, he's writing an academic work in as, what would you call it, in as balanced a way, and in as trying to speak language that his audience will understand. But there's this frustration in me, I think, because at the center of my faith is Jesus. Jesus is the center of Christianity. And what goes through my head when I'm thinking about this is Pope Paul VI in his apostolic exhortation Evangelii Nuntiandi. He's really clear. There's this line that has stuck in my head ever since I read it, where he says, "There is no true evangelization if the name, the teaching, the life, the promises, the kingdom, and the mystery of Jesus of Nazareth, the Son of God, are not proclaimed." He's just super clear, and this is at the beginning of the Age of Authenticity, 1975, that Jesus himself is the good news. This is our faith. And one of the things I think that stands out about Ignatius, stands out about Francis de Sales, is not their devoutness, like, praying, or like, when I think devout, I think of people who say a lot of prayers or something like that. But they're drawing people into a relationship with the person of Jesus. This is what all the rules that maybe are associated with orthodoxy and our faith sit around. But like, those rules are nothing without Jesus. And I guess in my work evangelizing, listening to people on the other end, the search to find myself is going to go nowhere unless I find the person of Jesus. A little bit before Pope Paul VI, in the Second Vatican Council, which really did sit at the very beginning of this age of authenticity, in Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution of the church, there's this line which talks about the fact that Jesus came both to show us who God is, but to show us who we are. And I think that really, if we don't help people on this personal search find Jesus, then they're never going to find who they are. So introducing people to the person of Jesus is not just taking them further towards doctrinal orthodoxy, it's taking them further and deeper into the search of who they are. They're not going to find who they are as a person, their true identity, the fullness they're looking for outside of Jesus.
I remember something that Christopher West says when he's talking about theology of the body. I think this is right. But it's like, it's such a bold claim that we make as Catholics, and we can only, like, it would seem arrogant, except that it's true. And it's that kind of thing of, like, we live in relativism and pluralism where you almost have to apologize for saying, this is what I'm pretty sure is true. It's like, no, this is absolutely true. But it's like this felt need to apologize for saying this is true because it's so at odds with what other people think is true. It's a strange space to be a missionary in, because you want to not offend people. That's the worst thing that you could do in this age. But also, maybe the truth is offensive. Like, to say you have the truth is offensive to some people.
There's something of that balance here, I reckon, in terms of being a missionary in this age, of encouraging that personal search, because that's where people are open and knowing their own need, but offering Jesus, because really that is where their personal search needs to end up if they're going to find what they're looking for. And I guess it's only the Holy Spirit that can help us get the right doses of each in every case. I don't think you can, unfortunately, find a decent formula out there for walking with individuals on the individual search and how and when to introduce Jesus. But I actually think the Alpha Course does quite well in some ways in presenting Jesus in a really clear way, but encouraging people to talk about what they think, what they feel, their experience. And so giving people the space to be listened to, giving the people the space to explore their own beliefs at the same time as giving an unapologetic presentation of ours.
And as you said, there's no clear formula. I was talking to someone recently who took their neighbor along to Alpha, and then at the end of the Alpha course, their neighbor went and saw a clairvoyant because they wanted to know about their future. That
Wow.
there is no absolutes in this age of, you know, what's going to work. That's, I guess, why we've got to stay so in touch with the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit alone knows, you know, like what we need and how each individual needs to be journeyed with. It's hard work, but it's good work, and we do it because we believe it's, you know, the most important thing, that people would have the fullness that they're made for, would find out who they really are, which is only discovered, as you said, in the person of Jesus, because we're made in the image and likeness of God, and he reveals that to us.
It's true.
Well, that's probably a good place for us to land today. As I said, next time we'll probably get into a bit more of specifically what this spirituality and religion in the world today looks like. That it's not just these two extremes, but what does that space of the middle look like? But hopefully it's been a good discussion. Thanks so much, Kat, and hopefully it's been good for listeners as well. Until next time, be well.
Amen.
This has been Contemplating Culture, a podcast produced by the missionaries of God's Love Sisters. For more information from today's episode, be sure to check out the show notes. We pray that today has blessed you, and most importantly, we invite you to continue the conversation.